Welcome back to the show, guys. We are chatting right now with author Nav Gill, who has written Under the Moonlit Sky, being released April 2010. I wanted to ask you, how can folks purchase the book if they're interested?
Well, the good news, all the major bookstores in North America have picked it up.
Awesome.
So right now,
congratulations.
Thank you.
This is your debut novel.
And pre-orders are actually available at Chapters, Chapters Indigo, Barnes & Noble, online, Borders, Amazon. I mean, there's people in Japan that can even order it if they want to.
Now, a lot of authors struggle to really get their first book published. Was this something that was difficult for you? Because it seems a lot of things just come to you with ease.
This one kind of did too. It was a bit of a surprise. When I wrote the book, I didn't think about getting it published.
Yeah.
There was no end goal in mind. It was just a story that I needed to share. And but when I did the first edit, I realized that unknowingly, I kind of really did create a pretty good novel that could be published. I mean, there was themes that connected everything. So I tried out a few test readers, and
who are those test readers? Like family, friends, or?
Well, the two people that have never been biased with me, my brother and my sister. My sister likes a lot of mainstream fiction, and my brother loves things like Lord of the Rings that I could never get through because they're so detailed. And so I thought, you know, these will be my biggest critics, and they both loved it for different reasons. One, of course, looked at it from a literary perspective, and the other one looked at more of an entertainment perspective. So then I contacted my professor from university, my feminist literature professor, actually. She suggested that I hire an editor, professional editor. So I went through that, and I hired one, and I went with a male specifically.
Okay.
Why is that?
I thought if a male could identify with a female character, then we've got something for the masses.
Right.
And he immediately loved it, and he said it to me. He's like, you know, I've got some publishers. Let me recommend it. And a couple months later, Napoleon Publishing was knocking on the door. They loved it, and they've been
just
wonderful.
Like that.
So it just yeah. I mean, there were a few discussions with some people, but I really loved their vision and the reasons why they fell in love with this book.
And I guess that's really important when you were publishing a book, to have that kind of relationship with your editor.
Yeah, because you are scared of any sort of changes, and you know, like for 2 years, these characters are your family. You know, and someone to critique them and so forth. It's kind of like they're also critiquing you. So it's a bit of a terrifying experience, but our relationship was it was so great, and I thought, you know, it's a Canadian publisher at the same time, so that was the way to go.
We've had, you know, several authors on the show. We had Jan Martel a couple of weeks ago, Life of Pi author, and we're asking him a bit about his process. He sits down, and when he has something to write, he has it, and it just comes out. Is it the same kind of thing for you? Well,
for me, it's more of feelings. I get kind of like a burst of inspiration, so I put on some music, rock music, preferably, and I just kind of closed the door, and I hand wrote the whole book.
Wow.
And so there's a leather-bound journal that I love picking up, and I need a great pen. I can spend an hour picking out pens, and I just sit there and I get into the mood, and I still don't know really what's gonna come out, and I just let it flow. And then afterwards, I go back and I read what I've written.
See, I find that fascinating that you're doing this by hand. Like, I have difficulty sometimes, you know, writing fast enough to compete with my brain. And you mentioned that this one really just flowed out of you.
Well, I've got someone to thank for that.
Oh.
I've tried it on the laptop at first, and I realized I was hitting writer's block. So one day I happened to be on, I was just surfing online. I read an article by J.K. Rowling, and she was complaining about how authors these days go straight for the laptop, and they've kind of given up the freestyle method of writing. So I was like, let me see what she's talking about. So I tried it, and it worked great.
Really?
Do you still have those pages, or are they in the hands of your editor now?
I do.
You do?
I do.
She has them in a safe deposit box.
Yeah,
This girl's going to make some big money off this one. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we're talking a bit about the history of the setting of this novel. For those folks at home who might not know a bit about, you know, the situation in India in 1984, just give us a brief summary.
Well, 1984 marked it was a buildup of tensions from the 70s, late 70s, between the factions of the Sikh population and Punjab government and the central government in Delhi, whereas like the Congress-led government by Indira Gandhi. And before things just kind of really spiraled out of, like, out of control. I mean, there was a lot of demands, there was threats of protests, and it really, really skyrocketed. So in June, the Indian Army stormed the holiest shrine for Sikhs, which is the Golden Temple. I mean, that's kind of like the Mecca for Muslims. That's what it is for Sikhs. And that actually hit a lot of nerves, and it really was shocking. So after that, a couple of months later, October 31st, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her 2 Sikh bodyguards. So what happened after that was, I mean, anyone can imagine that there might be some sort of violent outbreaks. But what was interesting was that the day she was pronounced dead very early on in October 31st, but there were no serious casualties or violent acts.
Right.
But it started November 1st, and it happened in a very systematic manner. Voters lists were used. Government buses bringing in people from neighboring states to act as mobs. Iron rods being handed out, kerosene being handed out, stocks of things that only you could really get from the government. And it happened in a matter of like 36 to 48 hours, they knew, and then just picking up the bodies and just getting rid of them.
Right.
So there's been a lot of, and after that, 20 years of just disappearances, forced disappearances, and just no answers. They've had like almost 8 to 10 commissions set up after that, but nobody was ever punished. Even though a lot of the politicians were out on the streets directing the mobs, nobody was ever punished. So, and then what happened after that, and a lot of people don't know this, is that widow colonies were set up because a lot of the men were wiped out. So you ask a lot of people, they have no knowledge of what happened in '84. So it's interesting that something like this is so major in your country's history. And what happened in '84 then resulted, kind of started the road towards air bombing in Canada, the biggest catastrophe in Canada.
And if that's the setting of the book, then can Hindus connect with this book? Can Muslims? Can Sikhs? Can anyone read this book and understand the story and connect with what this the main character is going through?
Well, that was also something that I kept in mind before I wrote it. I didn't want to write a one-sided political novel. It had to be balanced, and I wanted people who know nothing about it to kind of get an introduction. So afterwards, they go out and get their own answers. So I've tried the book on people from all faiths, and they all connected for different reasons. So.
Well, I hope our viewers can connect to it. It sounds like an amazing
we gotta have
story.
you back again and let us know how it goes. The book, Under the Moonlit Sky, the author Nav Gill. Go on to her website at navkgill.com and get all the information you need. Get the book.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks
for being
it.
here. Thanks so much. We'll be right back with more after this short break.